When Karen bulldozed my flourishing garden without warning, claiming it violated HOA landscape uniformity, she thought she could walk all over me, like she had with everyone else on the block. But she didn't know she'd just messed with the wrong neighbor. My garden wasn't just flowers and vegetables. It was a tribute to my late father. And when she crushed that memory under a hired bulldozer, I decided to teach her a lesson she'd never forget. Starting by growing something big in her own yard. I've always believed in keeping to myself. I work from home as a software consultant and live in a quiet HOA-run neighborhood just outside of Asheville, North Carolina. My garden was my peace. It wasn't just a patch of plants, it was a living memorial to my dad who passed away 3 years ago and who taught me everything I knew about gardening. Raised beds, heirloom tomatoes, blooming peonies, lavender hedges, and a tidy patch of sunflowers framed the walkway. Every weekend, I'd tend to the garden while listening to my dad's old jazz records. It became my therapy, until Karen moved in across the street. She was loud, nosy, and came with a clipboard like it was glued to her hand. Karen had the sort of energy that screamed HOA power trip. And worst of all, she quickly made herself the self-appointed enforcer of the community's rules. My first warning came in the form of a typed letter in a plastic sleeve. Your garden layout does not conform to approved HOA guidelines. Please submit landscape approval request within 10 days. HOA Landscaping Committee. Now here's the thing, my garden had been there for 5 years. It was on file, approved, no violations. So I politely walked over to Karen's porch to discuss it. She opened the door mid-sip of her green smoothie, squinting like I'd just knocked during nap time. I said, holding the letter. I got this notice about my garden, just wanted to clear it up. Without even inviting me to speak further, she said, well, it's not uniform with the neighborhood design standards. It's messy, unstructured. I'm on the HOA board now, things are changing. I politely explained that it had already been approved by the previous board. She waved her hand. That was before me. This neighborhood's going upscale, can't have scraggly plants dragging property values down. I went back home frustrated but calm. I wrote an email to the HOA, attached the original approval documents, and expected it would all blow over. It didn't. 3 days later, I came home from a grocery run to find a bulldozer, a literal bulldozer, parked halfway on my lawn. Karen stood on the sidewalk directing 2 hired workers, pointing at my flower beds like she was conducting an orchestra. "Excuse me," I yelled as I ran over. "You were warned," she shouted over the engine. "Non-compliance with HOA design standards gives us the right to rectify." "You do not have the right to bulldoze my property," I yelled. She shrugged. "Technically, the board can authorize landscape correction. The vote passed this morning." That's when I noticed 3 signatures scribbled at the bottom of a crumpled form. Karen held up hers, her friend Melissa, and one more I couldn't read. It was clear this wasn't a community vote. This was a personal vendetta. I stood there helplessly as they tore through the garden my father and I had built. Sunflowers snapped. The vegetable beds were overturned. My mother's peony bushes, gifted from her wedding bouquet, flattened. I called the police, but Karen had paperwork. The responding officer just looked uncomfortable and said, "This is a civil matter." I sat on my porch that night staring at the wreckage. My heart broke, not just for the garden, but for the memory and peace it represented. Karen had crossed a line. And that's when an idea sprouted. It started with research. I spent hours digging through the HOA's bylaws. Buried deep in the landscaping code was a clause Karen clearly ignored. No alteration or removal of resident landscape may occur without 14-day written notice and signed approval from the property owner. Boom. Her bulldozing stunt wasn't just unethical, it was illegal. But I didn't stop there. I remembered a conversation I once overheard. Karen was renting. She didn't even own her house. Her landlord? A guy named Dennis who lived out of state and hadn't raised rent in years. So I contacted him. "Hi, Dennis," I said on the phone. "I live across from your tenant, Karen. Just wanted to let you know she authorized the use of a bulldozer to destroy a legally approved garden on private property. There was a pause. She what? He asked. I explained everything, the fake vote, the lack of notice, and the damages. Dennis sighed. She's been a headache, honestly. I've had complaints. I saw my opportunity. If you're open to it, I said carefully, I'd be happy to make a generous offer for the property. I'd even pay closing fees. By the end of the week, I was in escrow. But I still hadn't figured out my revenge. Buying the house was one thing. I needed to make a point, a very visible, poetic point. And then I saw a pack of corn seeds in my garage. My dad had ordered them the summer before he passed. He wanted to try growing sweet corn for the first time. We never got around to it. Suddenly, I knew exactly what I was going to do. The sweetest revenge sprouts in silence. The day the sale closed, I held the keys to Karen's house in my hands. She didn't even know yet. Dennis, her now former landlord, had sent her the notice of non-renewal after finalizing the sale to me. Legally, she had 30 days to vacate, but the revenge I planned wouldn't take that long. Because I wasn't going to wait for her to move out, I was going to start planting immediately. First, I hired a local landscaping crew, friends of mine who knew my story and were happy to help. At night, while Karen was asleep or out, we'd slip in through the back fence, quiet as shadows. We worked fast. We tilled her backyard first, then her front yard. We planted hundreds of corn seeds in rows. Sweet corn, popcorn varieties, golden yellow kernels, all chosen from the same catalog my father had loved. We even laid drip irrigation lines. Her lawn was going to turn into Iowa farmland by morning. And for the final touch, I planted a single sunflower right in the center of her front yard, one of the very same seeds she had bulldozed. By the fourth night, it was done. Now all I had to do was wait and water. Karen must have noticed the soil turning over, but figured it was just the HOA maintenance team. I even caught her outside once, arms crossed, muttering about how someone better fix this mess. Oh, someone had fixed it. Within a week, the first sprouts appeared. Green, fast-growing stalks. Corn grows tall and fast under the right conditions, and I'd made sure conditions were perfect. By day 10, the plants were nearly knee-high. Her front porch looked like it had been teleported to a Nebraska cornfield. And that's when I finally told her. I walked over one morning, holding a copy of the deed and a warm cup of coffee. She was out front in her robe, squinting at the 3-foot-high leaves now obscuring her lawn gnome. "Karen," I said, calmly, "good morning." She turned, already annoyed. "Do you know whoever keeps doing this?" I held up the deed. "That would be me." She stared. "What are you talking about?" "I own your house now," I said, keeping my voice even. "Bought it from Dennis. The corn, the sunflower, the irrigation system, all mine, including the soil it's growing from." Karen blinked. Once, twice. "That's not possible." "Check with the county clerk," I said, sipping my coffee. "You have 3 weeks left on your lease. I suggest you enjoy the view." She went pale. "You can't plant corn. It's against HOA." "You bulldozed my approved garden, remember?" I said, now letting a little heat into my tone. "So consider this restoration, a memorial, and you're trespassing on my property." "You're insane," she shouted. I smiled. "And you're standing in the middle of my cornfield." That afternoon, she stormed into the next HOA meeting, papers in hand, screeching about property violations and emergency board actions. But here's the kicker. I'd already joined the HOA. With Karen no longer a homeowner, she had no authority on the board. Meanwhile, I now owned 2 properties in the neighborhood. My voting power, double hers. She screamed, cried, threw the deed across the table, but there was nothing she could do. The bylaws were ironclad. You mess with someone's private property, you pay the price. A few days later, she posted a bitter rant on Facebook about how a psychopath neighbor is ruining her life. Someone leaked the footage of her directing the bulldozer crew. It went viral. The internet labeled her #CornfieldKaren. That sunflower in her front yard? It grew to over 6 feet tall by the time she packed up and left. The final thing she saw before driving away. Final scene, 6 months later. I turned her old house into a community greenhouse and garden. Kids from the block came to learn about planting. We gave out free produce every Sunday. The sweet corn? Delicious. The sunflowers? Blooming. And that peony bush? It's finally thriving again, planted front and center where my father would have loved it. Karen may have thought her power came from a clipboard and some threats, but the truth is, real roots, the kind that come from love, family, and legacy, they grow deeper than any bulldozer can reach. If stories like this made you smile, laugh, or just cheer a little inside, consider subscribing to the channel. We've got plenty more neighborhood justice stories coming your way. Thanks for watching, and remember, never underestimate the power of peaceful revenge.